Well, good morning, Northview. How are you guys doing this morning? It is so good to see you. It's great to be connecting with everybody who's watching online as well. Guys, I'm going to start with a confession. That's kind of an interesting way to start. But I'm going to start with a confession. I have a problem because I always need to know why. Are there any other people in the room that are like me that don't just naturally comply with anything? You need to know why. We are contrarians maybe at heart. I'm not sure what it is, but there's just kind of an objection to just accept it and just do it. Or like someone will say, we're going to go to X restaurant for lunch. And I'll go, why? Why there? Who got to pick that? Why are we doing that? Or they'll say, this is the best treatment for your situation. Why? Can you explain that to me? This is the right unit for your house. Why? Can you explain that to me? Why? Sometimes they'll say, just shut up and do it. Why? Why? Now, if I open with a confession, can I also follow with a prayer request? My children are just like me. They are just like me. And they ask the why question. Life is full of why questions, and often there's a disconnect between moving forward until we have some clarity on the why question. Knowing why is important, and in faith and in life, there are some big-time why questions. One of the biggest is, why am I here? Why am I here? Like, have you ever stopped to kind of back up, take stock in this thing we call life and planet Earth, and you woke up today and just go, wow. Why? Why? Why do I exist? Why am I here? Another big question that comes, and this is a question that's maybe more connected to pain, is why? Have you ever noticed that why and pain just seem to fit really, really closely together? And it's just a matter of time in the human experience until you'll have why and pain connect. With one of our children, it was really vivid. With Cameron, she was a grade school age, kindergarten, first grade, something like that. And she came to Jamie and I one day, and she had this like scrape on her hip. It was right at the waistline, just below, so it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. We didn't even know it existed. And she came up and kind of said, hey, and showed us this little spot. Hey, does this look bad? And as a parent, you have lots of these moments, like you just do, where you're investigating wounds and injuries and such. This was one that kind of took your breath away right away, where you went, oh gosh, yeah. How long's that been there? Oh, a while. And you're like, I'm not sure if I should panic, but I'm kind of getting close to that. But it's, a Friday night or Saturday. It's not a moment where you can immediately respond, hey, how about, tomorrow or the next day, we check it again. Well, a day goes by and we just totally space it. The next day after that, 2 days later, it's like, oh, hey, Cameron, come here. Let me show me that spot again. And she shows it's worse than it was before. And so at that point, it's like, okay, clearly we have to do something. And so we get up and we head into urgent care. And when you check into urgent care and they look at you and they see this and they go, okay, we're going to make sure we get the rest of you guys done, and then we're going to finish the night with this one. You go, what's going on here? So long story made really, really quickly short, she had a MRSA infection. If you know anything about infections and staph infections, they're like the granddaddy of them all. Like, they are awful. They will do all kinds of carnage. That's why my eyes were big. That's certainly why their eyes were big. And so it was an immediate treatment. No idea how it happened or what she scraped against. I don't know. But it didn't matter. It was just like treatment. Let's go. So we sit down on a table, and doctor and nurse comes around, and they immediately start sanitizing best they can the wound, because they're going to try to get every amount of infection out and then try to close it up and let it heal. So to do that, you have to take this little child and you have to start poking and prodding and pushing and wiping and cleaning, and it hurts. And at that point in her life, she's just not had very many moments. No broken bones, no big injuries, anything like that, where you're in a spot where you have to just over and over and over tolerate pain. And so I'll never forget these words, because it just breaks your heart as a dad in that moment to see these little puddles coming out of her eyes, and she's just looking at you, and then she's looking at mom, and then she's looking at the doctor, and these three words: no, stop, why? On repeat. No, stop. Why? Those are the three most human responses to pain. And if you've not said them, you've thought them, and they may have come in different order, but those are the holy trinity of pain words. Not the four-letter ones that sometimes come out, but the other ones. No, stop. Why? There may be nothing that drives us to the why question like pain. And you know, in a series like we've been in for the last 2 months, where we've been studying the questions that Jesus asked, that highlighted both his humanity and also his faith journey that he was inviting people like you and I into, there may be no more powerful and connective question than the one we're going to look at today. Because did you know that Jesus asked the why question? He asked the why question. I mean the painful one, the one in response to pain. He asked why. It was in his darkest moment as he hung on a cross between heaven and earth, when he was crushed by the weight of the emotional pain he was experiencing in that moment. See, he was experiencing the emotional pain of betrayal. He had been turned over by one of his closest allies, someone who he had invited into his most innermost circle. He had betrayed him. He had sold him out. He had paved a path for Jesus to even be on a cross by identifying where he was, his location, to the Jewish and Roman authorities. For an amount of money, and even a kiss to identify, a gesture that would signify intimacy and relationship and friendship was used against Jesus. Guys, is there anything worse than being betrayed by a friend? He was experiencing that. He was in the darkness of that emotional place. Not only the denial or the betrayal, but denial. Peter. Not just Judas, but Peter. Judas was never highlighted like Peter was. Peter was clearly his best pupil, maybe his leading leader, the most likely to take things forward. He said about Peter, "On you, I'm going to build the church." Peter famously said, "Even if everybody falls away, I won't." And yet, what did he do? Not one time, not 2 times, 3 times. Denied Jesus. That leaves a mark. That leaves a mark on somebody when your closest friend says, "Even if everybody else leaves, I won't," and then they do. Not only betrayal, not only denial, but just flat out abandonment. Nobody was there. He was alone. He was alone. He had, before he got arrested, before he got put on a cross, he had asked his disciples, "Could you just stay awake with me for a little bit? I've got a big moment coming. I need you to be with me. I need you to pray with me. I need you to hold me up because I'm failing, I'm struggling." And what happens? They all fall asleep. In his moment of greatest need, they abandon him. It was in that darkness that he asked the why question. Full of emotional pain, crushed by physical pain. Crushed by physical pain. I mean, you know what it is when you have pain? You know how isolating it is? When you're in deep, sharp, or maybe even chronic pain, it has the nature of isolating you. You just feel alone. You just feel like nobody can see it, nobody can feel it, nobody could help you. And he was experiencing pain unlike anything you and I have ever experienced. Crucifixion was invented by the Romans to be the most brutal form of capital punishment. Like, it was literally designed to kill you by inflicting the maximum amount of pain for the maximum amount of time. There was nothing quick. There was nothing humane. There was nothing. It was just, let's drag it out and make it awful for as long as possible. Before a guy would even get to a cross, he would have to endure a scourging, a whipping, a beating that would happen with leather, this wooden handled device with strips of leather that came off of it, with a bunch of glass and bones and rocks at the end of it, whipped at least 39 times. The Jews had a limit. The Romans had no limit. You were often at death's doorstep before you even got on the cross. And then the cross, of course, the nails were designed to be placed in spots where nerves were, in between the two bones of your arm, in your feet, so that you could inflict maximum pain, so that you had to push up to breathe and sag down, making this kind of would you rather conversation normalized. Would I rather experience the pain in my arms, or would I rather experience the pain in my feet? But you'd have to do so to breathe up and down. It was in this moment that Jesus asked the why question. It was when he was being crushed not only by emotional pain or physical pain, but what might be hard for us to understand is the spiritual pain of the moment. Because it was a moment where he was enduring God's wrath. Old Testament pictures this a couple different ways, that when God would pour out his wrath, it would be as if a bowl full of wrath was dumped, or whether a cup full of wrath was consumed. Either way you want to see it, Jesus on the cross, in that moment, that's what he was doing. He was taking on in his body, in his soul, the weight and the punishment of the sins of the world, past, present, and future. The greatest pain of the whole thing was not emotional or physical, as great as they were. It was the separation that was happening between he and his Father. That's when God is pouring out judgment on people. Romans 1 talks about this. The most painful thing you experience when he pours out his judgment is that there's a separation that happens. Romans 1 talks about when you're determined to run away from God, he will let you run that road and not stop you. And that separation, that gap, is where that greatest pain is. Even greater than the crash that will eventually come. He's experiencing that separation. He's experiencing that pain. And it's in that moment that he asks the why question. Mark chapter 15, verse 33. At noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. And at 3 p.m, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. Which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? You know, sometimes, as it relates to faith, the pain question is one of the things that separates people from the faith journey. They've experienced pain, and there's kind of this belief that God doesn't know what this feels like. He can't possibly understand what I'm going through. He seems to have a blind eye turned to me in this moment. And so it creates these walls that go up between us and God. But what actually is revealed in Scripture is that if there is one person that lived on planet Earth who knows exactly what it feels like, it's Jesus. Because he's felt the physical pain, the emotional pain, and then he's even felt a pain you've never experienced before. The spiritual pain of wearing the sin debt of the world. He knows exactly what it's like to be in the worst pain imaginable and have God be silent when you cry out for help. To wonder, does he see me? Does he care? Can he help? As he's hanging on the cross, he only said 7 things because it was so hard to talk. It was so hard to talk. You can barely breathe. Most people would die on the cross because they would suffocate. They couldn't breathe any longer because you had to push up on the nails in your feet to be able to breathe. And as you got weary and tired, exhausted from the exercise, up, down, up, down, up, down, there would simply be no more strength left in your body. Every word that he said took effort. It took intentional commitment to get out. And one of the things he said from the cross was why? Why? Why, my God, why have you forsaken me? It was an honest question. It was a real question. But the question was far more than a question. Jesus' words were actually directly quoted from a psalm that was written hundreds of years before his life. Turn to Psalm chapter 22, verse 1, and look at these opening words. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me, so far from my cries of anguish? You know, every young Jewish boy would have learned Psalm 22. It was a psalm for times of distress. It was a psalm to focus your eyes and focus your heart, focus your mind on when you're going through dark and difficult times, when you're in a spot so deep that you feel like you can't get out. This was a psalm that you were taught to recite or to pray out loud. Jesus, in his hours hanging on the cross, must have thought of this and prayed through this and thought through this over and over and over again as he hung between heaven and earth. I want to look a little deeper at the words in it. It's fascinating because they parallel exactly what's happening to him on the cross. Verse 7 says, all who mock me, all who see me mock me. They hurl insults, shaking their head. He trusts in the Lord. And they say, let the Lord rescue him. What did Jesus' enemies do as they surrounded him and watched him die? They mocked him. He saved so many. Why can't he save himself? Why doesn't he call down angels from heaven to rescue him? Verse 16, they pierce my hands and my feet. All of my bones are on display. People stare and they gloat over me. They divide my clothes among them and they cast lots for my garment. This is exactly what was recorded in the gospel narratives about what happened as people around him, watching his life escape, cast lots for his clothing. My mouth is dried up like a potsherd. My tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. One of the 7 things Jesus will say from the cross is, I am thirsty. I'm thirsty. He says later, I'm poured out like water. All of my bones are out of joint. My heart has turned to wax. It is melted within me. Again, perfectly describing the experience of crucifixion. Not only that, this further description of the heart opens up a connection to the end of the whole narrative, the end of the whole cross moment, where just before he was taken off, he was double-checked to ensure dead. What did Roman soldiers do? They shoved a spear up through his side, and it's recorded that blood and water came out. Doctors in more modern world have examined some of these accounts and have come to a conclusion that Jesus died of a pericardial effusion, that the fluid around the heart built up to a point of no return and then exploded. Jesus literally died of a broken heart. A broken heart. All of this is contained in this psalm. Here's what's crazy about this psalm. It was written 600 years before Jesus and 1,000 years before crucifixion as a form of capital punishment was ever invented by the Romans. What this helps us to understand is that Jesus wasn't just asking a why question. He was looking backwards at a plan that was always the plan. This was no accident. The story of Jesus is not a story of a good man who got mixed up with the wrong guys and all of a sudden ended up on a cross. It's a story of someone who had a mission and a plan from day one, from minute one. And this was always going to be the way. Psalm 22 highlights that so vividly, but it's not just a psalm that highlights pain. On the back end of the psalm, there's great redemption. Verse 24, for he has not despised or scorned the suffering of the afflicted one. He's not hidden his face from him, but he's listened to his cry for help. Future generations will be told about the Lord. Verse 30, future generations will be told about the Lord. They will proclaim his righteousness, declaring to a people yet unborn, he has done it. He has done it. In his greatest moment of despair, in his greatest moment of agony, Jesus expressed both great suffering and great hope in a God who saw him, in his Father who saw him. God may seem absent here, but Jesus trusted that he was fully and completely present in this plan and was forcefully there, even though no one could see it. These are words of confidence, of hope, and of victory. This question, my God, why have you forsaken me, was not a question of despair, but a question of assurance. It was a question referring us back to a promise and a truth that God will not forsake us, that he has a plan to redeem all pain. And for Jesus to start, my God, why have you forsaken me, would be like for us to hear, oh, say, can you see? We know where that song goes. We can start singing the next verses. But you know that song was written in the middle of battle. That song was written as bombs were going off and as lives were being lost, as people were suffering and going through great joy. We sing it at ball games, all pretty and fine. Listen to the lyrics. It's ugly. It's bloody. But we see it as freedom, ultimately. Because all of that has achieved something greater than what even some of those lyrics highlight individually. In the same way, while Psalm 22 might highlight great difficulty and great suffering, it was ultimately seen as a psalm of great hope and great deliverance and great promise. That in dark times where there seems like there's no way out, that God is working. Jesus, when he said, my God, he couldn't say the whole psalm. He didn't have the strength to say it. He didn't have the energy to say it. You had to say things in short little bursts. And it took everything he could to say even those words. But he said enough so that everybody who heard it could look backwards and go, I've heard those words. I know those words. I know what that means. And you know, the fact that he said it in darkness means something to me. I don't know if it does to you, but it means something to me. I've always loved the way Bruce Steeleman describes this. He says, on a sunny hill in Galilee one day, Jesus taught his disciples and said, our Father who art in heaven. And that was good that he taught them that. But once on a dark hill on Calvary, he also taught that we can pray, our Father who art in hell. To show that God is with us in the hardest and the darkest and the most difficult times. Because it's in the darkness that we need to know the most of his love. In Jesus' greatest moment of agony, he expressed both great suffering and great confidence in his Father who would vindicate the righteous. He accepts his suffering and trusts that God's ultimate intervention, his Father's ultimate intervention, will come at his death. Far from a cry of abandonment and confusion, it was a cry of access and confidence. It was a cry that highlighted, a question that highlighted the relationship that he had and the confidence that he had in his Father. Mark chapter 15, verse 37 records that shortly after he prayed or said those words, my God, why have you forsaken me? With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus saw how he died, he said, surely this man was the Son of God. There's a lot going on there, so let me unpack that. There's a man at the foot of the cross coming to an understanding of who Jesus is. And there's something that's taking place in a different location in the temple. I want to go to the temple first. There was a curtain in the temple that separated people from the Holy of Holies, the most holy place in the temple. It was separated by a curtain that was 60 feet tall, 30 feet wide, and 4 inches thick. And at the instant Jesus breathed his last, it tore from top to bottom without anybody touching it. Previously, no one could go into that holy place without dying. Only the high priest, one time a year, making sacrifice for the sins of the people, could go in. One time, one person, once a year. That area that had been so separated is now wide open. And it is a symbol of exactly what was accomplished on the cross. Because what was once separated, us and God, we can now have access to. We can come to a place like that Roman soldier did that said, I realize I put him on the cross, I killed him, and yet I also can come to a place of recognition now that says he was the Son of God. He is the Son of God. And I can have access to God. I can have connectivity to God. I don't have to have an intermediary to go through there. And I now can connect on a level of intimacy that I didn't have before. Because of the finished work of Jesus, this curtain is now torn wide open and we can draw near to God and be in relationship with the creator and sustainer of the universe. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 16 says, let us then approach God's throne with grace and with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. What this is highlighting is that because of Jesus, we don't merely have an opportunity to extend relationship with God. He extends also to us his redemption story. In the same way that he experienced pain to the point that he felt totally abandoned, he was vindicated, justified, and ultimately protected by his Father. He invites you not just to have a relationship with him, but to allow your story to similarly be fused with his. Not just his relationship is offered, his redemption story is offered to you and I. So I ask you today, now that that curtain is torn open, now that Jesus has stood in our place and died on that cross, because he asked why, but because he didn't say, no, stop. And he endured to the very end. He purchased for you and I something we could never do for ourselves. So I ask you today, with the confidence that Jesus had in his Father, with the grace that he established at the cross, the curtain is open, access to God is there. Are you entering into that gift? If you're anxious, if you're overwhelmed, if you feel burdened, if pain is gripping you, physical, spiritual, know that Jesus did what he did and endured it like he did so that you would not feel trapped or imprisoned forever, but so that you could enter in, not just to have relationship, but to have redemption. You are welcome in the palace of the King, no longer as a stranger or as an enemy, but as a son and a daughter. So my question to you is, how will you respond to this? How you respond to this gift? Knowing that Jesus could no longer be thought of in your mind as someone who doesn't get you or doesn't understand you or doesn't understand life. He understands more than you understand what pain is. And he gave his life so he could knock the teeth out of it. Take the bite out of it. Take the sting out of it. And extend to you a redemption story that you won't find any other way. This is a moment where we reflect on the length and the breadth of that moment on the cross. It's really designed to highlight two things. One, the gravity of our sin. Gravity of our sin, meaning there was no other way to do this. If there was another way, there would have been another way. There wasn't another way. The cross existed and is in our story, is in Jesus' story to highlight the gravity of our sin. This is what it took to cover our sin debt. Number two, it's designed to show the depth of the love of God. How far he would go, what length he would go to, the things he would do, how he would not stop short of anything to deal with your sin, but to extend also his love. So I ask you today, would you respond to that? Whether in salvation or in devotion, maybe in this moment now of communion. In just a moment, I'm going to pray. I'm going to invite you to just take your mind, take your heart to the cross, to that very moment where Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? To know that the answer to that question is tied to the confidence he had in his Father, the plan that he was living out and walking out, but also in some ways the answer to that question is for you. For you. That's why he forsook his son in that moment. For you. So will you take some time to just sit in that? To just sit in that and to understand how much the Father loves you, how much he would do to make sure your life, if he loved you this much, if he would give up his son, how much more will he ensure that everything in your life will be a redemption story? He loves you more than you could ever fathom. And he invites you today, in this moment, to experience that. So as I pray, let's just go to this time of communion. The emblems are there in front of you. Bread representing Jesus' broken body, the juice representing his blood shed. And let's just say thank you and stand in awe of a God who would go to the depths of pain so that we could experience the depths of joy. Heavenly Father, we